Feel free to, interrupt or ask questions at any point. So we're just going to start by getting the files from Mixamo and then prepping them in Blender, and then we'll move them into Godot. So I'm just going to Google Mixamo, and we'll be able to log in using Adobe. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Actually, I'm pretty sure I still have the original version of Fuse still on my Steam account.
That's cool. Okay, so when I'm on Mixamo, so you can choose a character first, and then there's animations. And the characters and the animations are independent of each other. So all of the animations can apply to all the characters. This may not be true in other resources, but that's how it works here. If you're on Turbo Squid or something else like that, it's probably just going to be, whatever thing is packaged together. So it's going to be a little bit of a different setup. But if you have a specific model that you want to work with, I can take a look at it and say, I think this will work, or I think it won't. So let's see. We have a character chosen. There's a bunch of characters. They're all kind of like whatever. You could choose whatever you want. Got this little mouse thing that's kind of goofy. It's kind of funny, so I'll use that. And you can download when you download an animation, you can either have it attached to the model or not, but it only lets you download one animation at a time. So this is another thing that's like very specific to Mixamo. It may be different if you're using a different service. You may be able to download different animations. So I'm going to keep things simple. I'm just going to do a couple different animations, but you can have, as many animations as you want. So I have my mouse character. I'm going to start with a walk animation. So I'm just going to search walk here. And there's a bunch of different walks. Could choose one that looks fun. Maybe this one. Okay, so that looks fun. That's cool. We can look around. You can play with the parameters, but one thing that you really have to make sure to click on, which I don't seem to actually be able to access because my screen is so small, but there's a parameter down here. Maybe if I make this browser smaller. Okay, that's annoying. Maybe if I go into full screen. It won't let me go into full screen. Okay. Maybe if I zoom out. No, okay, there we go. Okay. So my screen is kind of small, and you should be able to see this no problem. There's this parameter here in place. That has to be checked. It's not going to work. It's going to look goofy in Godot if your character is moving in the animation and the script is also moving the character. So the first thing to do is make sure to check in place. Then anything else you want to play with, if you want to increase the number of frames, you can do that. That's probably not a good idea though. Let's set this back to what it was. Or I'll just click reset. You can change the arm space. I don't know what that means. I think, okay, so it lists the arms up or down. You can play around with these parameters if you want, but just make sure you check in place. And then for the first animation that you download, make sure to download with skin. After that, we're going to say without skin, but for the first one, we want to do with skin. The format, you really only have FBX. We're going to use just the default FBX binary. We're eventually going to turn it into a GLB, so we don't really care what it is. And then for frames per second, it doesn't really matter that much. So we're just going to click download here. And that's going to take a second. And so now that's downloaded. We're going to go to the downloads folder. And you'll see we have this walking.fbx. So let's get one more animation so we can switch between the two. So let's go to run. And I'll just have a run animation for when the NPC or the enemy starts to attack me. So let's find a scary run. Here we go. Okay, same thing here. Make sure to check in place. We don't want it to be moving while it's moving. And then for this one, click download, and this time choose without skin. That's if you know, we'll see why in a second, but we're just gonna click download. Okay, so we've got 2 animations, and however many more animations you want, just keep downloading them, but don't include the skin. And always check in place. If you're using another resource, they'll probably package all the animations together. You can just use it like that. Notice there's also an upload character button. If you have a character mesh that you want to animate with Mixamo, you can upload your own character and it'll apply the animations. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But you can give it a shot and see how it looks. Sometimes it works pretty good. Okay, so now we have these 2 files. We're going to import these into Blender, and we're going to prep them for Godot. So I'm going to open up Blender, and I'll try to make sure to talk about everything I'm doing. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of the default stuff. So I'm going to hit A to select everything, and hit X and delete. Should I turn off the lights again? Yeah, okay. Okay, so we delete everything, and then we import our first FBX. So we go to File, we go to Import, choose FBX, go to Downloads, and we did walking first, so we're gonna open that. I'm gonna click Allow. Okay, there's our model. You can zoom in. It's kind of small. If you want to scale it up, you can do that. But you want to scale the model and the armature. So basically, without getting into too much detail, I can also go to Model Preview up here if I want to see what it's going to look like. Without going into too much detail, when you download one of these files, you have an armature, which is basically just like how you animate a complex mesh. It has like different bones, and you can animate the bones to create different types of animations. The armature has connected to it this mesh, which is the character. And the character is a child of the armature, basically because the armature determines where the character is going to be based on the animation. The armature also includes this animation data and a bunch of other stuff. So eventually we're gonna export all that stuff. But if we want to scale it up or down, you want to make sure to do it to both of these items. So I would click on both of these and hit S to scale, maybe do like 2, hit enter. I'm just doing this as an example because the scaling is kind of the main thing that you're going to want to do in Blender that you don't want to do in Godot. You don't want to scale anything in Godot. It always leads to issues. So once I've scaled, you can see that the armature has a different scale now. So I'm going to click on the armature and just hit Control A and apply scale. Uh-oh. What happened? Oh, it moved over here. Why did it do that? Okay. It's rotated. Maybe that's why. Let's apply rotation. Okay, now let's apply scale. It still does that. Okay, that's weird. We'll leave it alone. Maybe it'll be fine. Okay. Anyway, we scaled it up. That looks fine. I hit Command S kind of by reflex, but you may want to save this as you're working on it so you can come back later, but you don't need to. We're eventually going to export this, and then it's just going to be in Godot, and we can always re-import it if we want to. Okay. So let's look at the animation for a second, and then we're going to add in our second animation. So I'm gonna put my cursor at the top of this little window and drag over like this. And I'm gonna go to the tab thingy here, and I'm gonna go to Dope Sheet. Dope Sheet is where you control all of the animations. We're not actually gonna edit anything in here. We're just gonna use it to change the names of the animation to make it easier to know what we're doing. I'm gonna hit N to get rid of this little thing here. And then I'm gonna go to Action Editor. And when I scroll at this toolbar, it'll scroll over here, and you're gonna see there's one action, which is our animation. And if we play, if I hit the space bar, you'll see our animation is playing. And when we get to the end of the animation, it stops. Okay. So let's rename this animation. Let's just call it walk. That'll make it a lot easier to see. And then, I keep hitting save. I don't really need to save, but let me just save it. I'll save it on the desktop, or I'll put it in here. Oh, I already have a Blender file folder. Okay, I'll put it in here just so when I keep hitting save by reflex, it doesn't bring up that window. So then the next thing we have to do to make sure the animation makes it over to Godot is we have to click this push down button. And I'll show you what happens. So I'm gonna open up another little window down here and switch this over to nonlinear animation. This is another editor that we can use to combine different animations together. If I click push down, you're gonna see it down here. I'm gonna hit N to get rid of this menu. So you see there's the walk animation. So we need these animations to show up under this armature to make it over to Godot. Sometimes they make it over anyway, but this is the best way to do it. Okay, so we have one animation. Now we're gonna import our second animation. So I'm gonna go to File, I'm gonna go to Import and go to FBX. I'm gonna open up my zombie run. And this is gonna make another armature. And we're just gonna delete that armature. Because once we load this, it actually also loads in this animation data, and the animation data can be applied to the armature that we already imported. So when we imported the armature, we also imported the animation data. We no longer need this like second armature, which is, down here. So I'm just gonna hit X, delete it. I'm gonna select my original armature, and I'm gonna use my action editor, and you'll see if I choose that new animation, it plays it along just fine because they're based on the same type of armature. Okay, so I'm gonna rename this one as well. I'm gonna call this run, and then I'm gonna click push down. So now I have a walk animation, I have a run animation, and I've got everything I need to go to Godot. I only have what I need in the scene, so I'm just gonna export the GLB. If you got other stuff in the scene for some reason, you might wanna select everything, so you can select your mesh and then shift select the armature. But that's all I have in my scene, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm gonna go to File and go to Export. And I'm gonna go to GLB. And then I'm gonna go to the desktop and find my template and find my models. And I'm just gonna call this mouse.glb. And you can leave all the defaults the same. Okay, so let's export. So now we're ready to go over to Godot. If we go to our game template and look in models, we'll see there's mouse.glb. It's pretty large, okay? So it's a pretty large model. There's a lot of texture data and mesh data in there. If you have a model that's like 500 megabytes or something like that, that's too big. So 30 megabytes, I would probably do some optimizations with this because 30 megabytes is also pretty big. But if it's over 100 megabytes, then you don't want that. So if you see that, we can do some optimizations. There's some easy optimizations. Like if we look at this mesh, it's actually not that complicated. So it's probably the textures, which are taking up a lot of space. So we'd probably edit the textures. But yeah, that's not what we're talking about right now. So let's skip that now. 30 megabytes is okay. It's not great. But if you're over 100 megabytes, that's when you want to really, especially if you have multiple files that are this large, you're really going to increase the size of the game unnecessarily. Okay, so anyway, it's in the models folder, so when we go to Godot, it's going to import. And that might take a second, because it's a big file. Okay, there we go. And we're just going to add this into our enemy scene. So I'm going to go to the enemies and click on the scene node. And we're going to take out this beautiful pink donut and replace it with our new mouse. So I'm just going to turn off the donut. I'm going to go to the main node. And I'm going to go to my models. There's my mouse. Oh, you do see the mouse textures in here. So that's interesting. I didn't see them. Oh, here they are. I guess. Oh, I think Godot separated them out. That's interesting. So yeah, these textures are massive. These are 4K textures. So that's crazy. You don't need 4K textures. I'm not going to edit this right now, but if you have 4K textures, see how they're 4,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels? That's too much. Especially, this is like a cartoony looking character. Anyway. So that's why these are so large. Each one of these images is really large, and that's why it takes up so much space. And again, I'm not going to do it right now, but normally I would edit these to be more efficient. Anyway, let's just drag our mouse and drag it in here. Okay, so now we have our mouse character in here. That looks decent. The size is actually already pretty good. So normally I would go back to Blender to scale, but I think it actually looks pretty decent. So let's just make sure it's facing the right direction. So I'm going to go to the transform and rotate 180 on Y. So now it's facing in the right direction. And now we just have to add some scripting to control the animations. And so I'm going to do this in the most sort of like basic bare bones way. But if you have a lot of different animations, eventually what you're going to want to use is a different node called an animation tree, which controls the transitions between the different animations. I'm not going to do that because it's a whole other process. And if you just have two animations, it's really easy just to trigger them in the code. So it really depends on the level of complexity what the right approach is. Okay, so I'm going to click on the mouse, and I'm going to go to Editable Children. And that's going to let me see this animation player that Godot created. I'm going to ignore everything else in here. I don't need to worry about that. But I am going to make some changes to the animation player. And it's not going to let me do that at first. So we're going to look at how do we get access to that. So if I'm going to select the walk animation first. And so we'll see the walk animation. I'm going to click autoplay, so that means it's going to play the walk animation as soon as the scene starts, which makes sense because my enemies are walking around in their patrol. If you have idle states, you might want to start on an idle state, but my enemies don't really ever stand still, so I don't have to worry about that. So now if I hit play, we'll see a preview of the animation. It's extremely slow, so I'm probably not going to like that, so I'm probably going to turn up the speed scale. It won't let me make this window bigger. Let's see if I select something else. Okay. Sometimes Godot, I think it's because of the projector, but it won't let me make the inspector larger. Maybe if I get rid of this. There we go. Okay. So it's still not that easy to see, but there's a speed scale here. If I set that to a different number, like 2, now when I play back the animation, it goes faster. So you can set that to whatever you want if you want to speed up the animation or slow it down. You can also set that in code if you want to. Okay. So now the other thing I probably want to do with this is loop it. If we go back to my Pac-Man scene, we can see there's my new mouse character. And if I run the scene, you can see he starts to walk. Oh, he's standing. We'll fix that in a second. You can see that he loops the animation once, but then he just is stuck. And that's because the animation is not set to loop. So let's go back. This is still called Ghost, even though now it's a mouse, but that's okay. So if I click on this loop button, it says I'm not allowed to do that, but I can I can fix that by clicking on the this animation and go to manage animations. So again, there's an animation button right here in the animation editor. If I click on that, most of the stuff I'm not allowed to do yet, but if I go to manage animations, these are all the animations, and what I can do is I can click on this floppy disk and click make unique, and now I'll be able to change whatever I want. So I'm going to hit OK, and now I can loop this walk animation. So now I got an error. Oh, I tried to run the scene, not the main scene. Okay, so now he's walking, and he's walking along. That looks fine. Okay, so he is standing like on top of the mesh. Let's see if we can fix that real quick. Let's go to my enemy. Okay, so he's set all the way up here. And my mesh, where's my mesh? My mesh is like up here. So I might need to change the height of my mesh. Let's go to our navigation region and clear our nav mesh. And let's go to the parameters. Okay, let's set the height to like 0.1. Okay, let's see if that looks better. No, he's still floating up there. Okay, maybe we need to change this scene. Maybe if we move him down. No, he's still floating. Okay, I'll have to debug that later. I'm sure there's a way to make it line up correctly, but I'm not exactly sure where the issue is there. Maybe I just need to move the mouse down like that. Okay, that looks better. So yeah, just move the mouse down a little bit. I moved him down a little bit too far. But you can just line that up with the navigation mesh or whatever he's walking on. Okay, so now I want to switch from walk to run when he starts to chase the player. And so we need to use some scripting for this. But we already have most of it set up. So as I mentioned before, there's more sophisticated ways to do this, but if we're just switching between two different animations, we can just use a couple of basic lines of code. So I'm going to click on my ghost script, and we already know when the ghost starts to follow the player. It's down here when we say is following player equals true. So let's just change our animation there. So when I set is following player to true, I'm going to grab this animation player, and I'm going to say dot play, and then I'm going to give it the run animation. And then when it stops following the player down here, just going to copy that same code, and we're going to go back to playing the walk animation. This is very simple because I don't have like an idle, I don't have an attack, I don't have a death animation. All these other animations would be triggered at different points. And depending on how complex it gets, you may want to use an animation tree or a finite state machine or something else like that that'll manage it for you. That's more complex than what I'm talking about right now. So I'm not going to do that right now, but if that's something you want to do, we can look into doing it. Okay, so now that's actually pretty much all we need to do. A couple of things I want to change. First thing is make sure, I'm going to click on the animation player, and I'm going to go to the run animation and just make sure that loops. If it doesn't loop, you know, it's not going to loop when we're playing the game. And then let's look at how this looks for a second, and then we're going to change a parameter. So if I go over here, he's going to be walking along, and when he sees me, he's going to start to run. And you're going to notice that... Uh-oh. got an error. I don't know why, but I'm just going to ignore it for now. So let's do that one more time. This time, watch the change in the animation. Oops. I'm not in his field of view. Okay, so it happens very quickly, but basically it just like snaps to the other animation. It looks kind of stupid. Again, an animation state tree is like a way more sophisticated way of dealing with this, but a simple way to deal with this is just to take our animation player and go over here to our inspector, and under playback options, you can set a blend. So this will blend between the two animations, so there's a smooth transition from one animation to the other. I'm just gonna set this to like 0.5 seconds, so there'll just be a really smooth, a really short transition. This will at least make it not look super goofy. I mean, it already looks goofy anyway, but it'll look a little less goofy without doing too much more work with the whole state machine. So it's a little subtle, but you can see he doesn't just snap right into an animation. He kind of starts to bend over. So the walking animation is really not timed right. Let's slow him down. You know, let's set his speed to like 1. It doesn't have to be super realistic, but we don't want it to be like totally. Okay, so now, but now he's standing up again. That's weird. You know, I might have accidentally added like a position keyframe in the animation player. I think I did. So let's fix that in a second. But if the reason I can tell that's happening is because he starts up and then he moves down, and that looks weird. But one of the things you have to be careful with the animation is you can actually animate anything, and if you're not careful, you'll set a position keyframe and it'll screw things up. Okay, so I'm also getting an error. I guess I don't have a game over scene, so that's why I'm getting that error, but I'm not gonna fix that right now. Let's go check and see if I added some weird keyframes. So I'm gonna go to the mouse. Okay, so all this stuff that says Mixamo rig is fine. Let's check my walk animation. Okay, that's fine too. So I don't really know what's going on. I'll do some more debugging to make sure that the player doesn't weirdly stand too high at the beginning. Maybe I did something over here. No, I don't think so. Anyway, that's the basic idea. That's how you can get some animations in there. It's obviously going to be different for different platforms if you get something from Turbo Squid or something like that. But the basic concept should pretty much be the same. So if you want to add a character with animation, you could start with that. Let me know if you run into trouble, and we can debug some stuff. I have some of my own debugging to do, which I'll do in a second. But for now, I'm just going to update my scripts. And so really, the only thing that's different in here is my mouse model, which I actually don't really want to upload because it's so large. I want to optimize it a bit first. So I'm not going to commit this yet. But I will commit this scene and this script here. So there's really only 2 changes to the script. So I'm going to say adds animation scripting. And so yeah, sometimes if you're using GitHub, if you have some really big files that you haven't optimized yet, I would avoid committing them, because once you commit them to a GitHub repo, even if you optimize them later, those original files are always going to be part of your GitHub repo forever. And that's a really good way to have a GitHub repo that is taking up like 20 gigabytes on your computer and you don't even realize it. So I'm going to optimize these images and make some other fixes, and then I'll upload those changes. Okay, so that's it for the animations. Obviously, there's a lot more that you could do with animation, but I think that's good to get started. Any questions on any part of that process? Okay.